arrived in Greenland, actually, last month, on August 14th, which is about 3 weeks ago. And I filmed this video on site in Greenland. I want to share with you. It's just 1 minute long. Which one do I? It just keeps melting and melting and melting. As a matter of fact, from July 31st this month until August 3rd, in a matter of 4 days, Greenland lost about 53 billion metric tons of surface ice within 4 days. And that amount of water is 40 billion metric tons more than average of the same time last year or previous years. By the end of the summer, which is actually now, it was estimated about 400 billion metric tons of surface ice in Greenland would have lost to the ocean. It's hard for us average people to come to grips with this idea of 400 billion cubic tons of ice. What does that mean? The journalist has a talent in making it understandable for the ordinary citizens. They explain that 400 billion metric tons, this amount of water, is enough to flood the country of Greece and make everybody in Greece standing in 35 centimeter deep of water. 35 centimeter. So I thought, okay, then Greece is 4 times larger than Taiwan. In other words, this amount of ice melting into water is enough to flood our island so that every one of us would be standing in flood water up to 140 centimeters, about here. That much water. So on August 15th, the second day I was there, the biggest melt of the summer occurred. You know, it was estimated that by the end of the summer, 400 billion metric tons would disappear. But the next day, when I was there in Greenland, on that single day, the amount of ice that collapsed into sea was already 11 billion in a single day. And so 11 billion tons of surface ice to the ocean is equivalent to 4.4 million Olympic-sized swimming pool. That much water. And that happened to be also the same day when President Trump announced that he wanted to buy Greenland. Later on, I was watching the presidential candidates in the United States. I listened carefully to what they say about what they're going to do with the climate change. And I noticed that Bernie Sanders, he used one comparison. He compared the challenge of climate change to this global community is as demanding and as big as World War II, which demands all the countries, all the communities to really work on it. It's as big as this. Then in the Climate Change Performance Index, actually you could go online and check it, especially young people here. It's done by a German think tank, German Watch, and the index is called Climate Change Performance Index, which ranks annually 60 countries about how they cope with the policies they use to cope with climate change, the energy uses, and the renewable energy policies, and so on. And of the 60 countries, Taiwan is ranked, guess which number? 56. So the lowest 5. We are, on that index, we're always the lowest 5. In other words, it might not be very fair to Taiwan because we are an export-oriented country and infrastructure is a bit different. However, the lowest 5, it means we really have a lot of work to do. Then, how is EU ranked? Of the 60 countries, EU is ranked number 16. The EU target for the year 2030, which is very close now, are at least 40% cut in greenhouse gas emission compared with 1990, at least 32% of total energy consumption from renewable energy, and they want to reach at least 32.5 increase in energy efficiency. And the long-term goal is to cut its emission by 80 to 95% by the year compared to 1990 in the year 2050. So it's a very ambitious goal, but the sense of urgency that we get, the sense of urgency. And today's speaker, Dr. Franz Fischler, he himself is an expert on agriculture. He was the EU commissioner between 1996 to 2004. When I read his bio, I was thinking, oh, you could serve as agriculture minister for the EU for 8 years. With us, every minister, the longevity, the average time of service is probably 2 years or less. It's pretty tough to try to cope with something as big as climate change when every minister changes every 2 years, you know. And during his term, during the good 8 years of his term as cultural commissioner for the EU, he implemented so-called Agenda 2000, which was one of the most ground-laying significant policies for agriculture across Europe. And in 2006, he founded a foundation which is called the RISE Foundation, not something that we eat, rice, to rise. RISE Foundation, which is a think tank that provides research reports as well as consulting services on important issues. I moved to the South 2 years ago, so my new friends, whom I love, are farmers and fishermen. And every June, every year, there's one thing that I look forward to, that is lychee, 荔枝, should be in the market. But this year, somehow, there are almost no lychees on the market in June. So I asked my orchard friends, farmers, what happened? They said in Thai, don't you remember the previous winter was very, very warm? So when the winter was too warm, the fruit trees stopped blossoming. When there are no blossoms, then there are no fruits. And another friend of mine who is a mango grower, he said his products, his mangoes, decreased 40% due to climate. Okay. So climate change is not theory, it really is a huge problem. And with the hands-on experiences, first-hand experiences that Dr. Fischler had been doing for so many years, he is the right person to share with us his insights and his experiences. Let's welcome Dr. Fischler.
Okay. Once again, hello. Maybe it's a bit high. A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting me to come to Taiwan and to discuss with you climate change. What I learned in the meantime, thanks to the introductory words by Professor Lung, is that obviously climate change is slower than the change in your governments. But however, also about climate change, urgent action is needed. And what I would like to achieve is, first of all, give you a proper information about some basics related to climate change, based on facts and not on fakes, is important to notice nowadays. And then I would like to raise your awareness of the problems related to climate change. And then I hope I can convince you how important it is to engage, because without an engagement from all of us, we will not be able to change things and to limit climate change. This is also important to be aware of. We cannot stop anymore climate change. This is for sure. But we can limit it so that the damages and the consequences of climate change are manageable. To give you a short outline, so I will start with the so-called Anthropocene, and then climate change and its main cause, and then I will speak shortly about the Paris Agreement and the EU climate policy. So these three parts are basically information. The other second parts are then more about details also related to agriculture and the fishery sector, because this is the main interest from what I understood. Okay, let's get started with the Anthropocene. In 2016, the International Geological Society suggested to introduce the Anthropocene as a new geologic time period, because the human influence in many natural systems is so enormous that they found it would be justified to call this new Earth period Anthropocene. It's the first period ever where we have such a big influence by the humans. And you see here on this picture also very often this thing is called the human footprint on our globe. And this footprint is going to be deeper and going to be bigger. So we cannot deal with all this atmospheric, geologic and hydrologic and biospheric areas and Earth systems. We choose one of them, and this is the CO2, the carbon cycle, because this is the most relevant one for climate change. And here you see the main elements of this carbon cycle. So the idea is not that I explain now all the details of this carbon cycle. You have here on the right-hand side what's going on in the seas, and on the left-hand side what's going on the land. All I would like to show here is that we must be aware that we are speaking about a very complex system, and only if we are able to deal with this complexity, we are also able then to find positive solutions. And then you see that the different colors of the figures. So the white colors are those carbon which is stored. The yellow are the natural processes going on, and the red ones are the emissions by humans and the effects influenced by the humans. And if you compare the figures, then you find that the human emissions are comparably small figures, which demonstrates that also that the system is rather fragile and that it is very difficult to keep a balance. But also these figures are comparably small. If you see here the human emissions, or if you see here the other direction, what's going on the sea, that more CO2 from the atmosphere is going into the seawater. So these two elements are the main elements in relation to climate change. But you see also not only the fragility, but also that these small emissions, or comparably small emissions, have an enormous effect. And you can measure the increasing concentration in the atmosphere. This is the most known measurement, which started back in 1958, and it's called the Keeling curve, because a certain Mr. Keeling, a scientist, he started this monitoring on the Mauna Loa Observatory. This is located in Hawaii. And you can see the steady increase of the carbon concentration compared with 1960, where we had a little bit more than 310 CO2 concentration ppm, and now we are at the level of 400. So it's more or less an increase from 300 to 400 ppm. And this is the reason why our climate is warming. And also the warming can be measured, and it is here such a measurement from the very beginning, when the air temperature was registered until last year. And you see that the development, the change of the surface air temperature is much higher over land than in the average if you put together the sea and the land. And it's even lower clearly than over sea. Many people were for a rather long time of the opinion that this is a natural process, so it is not much influenced by humans. But the reality is a totally different one. A big group of scientists tried to explain the global warming only on the basis of natural processes, and this is these blue bars, and the black line is the measured global warming on all the different continents, and here you see it also over the sea and over land. And the conclusion is very clear. It is impossible to explain the increase of the global temperature if you only use natural processes for to explain or to give the reasoning for this development. So without the human influence, the development which we are facing is not explainable. This is the main message here, and therefore it is clear that we have to change the human behavior if we would like to change global warming. And here you see the effects of global warming. The effects clearly depend on the increase of the temperature. You all know this 2 degrees Celsius line, which was in the Paris Agreement the base for the measures which were suggested by the international community. In the meantime, I must say one is even more careful, because the scientists came to the conclusion that our systems are more vulnerable than originally expected. So the effects which were calculated for an increase of the temperature by 2 degrees happen already when the temperature is increasing by 1.5 degrees, and therefore in the last IPCC reports the recommendation is we must do the utmost to keep the global warming within 1.5 degrees. But even if you accept, or if we are able to reach this limitation, we have huge problems with the most sensitive systems. For example, already by 1.5% the coral reefs in the world will extinct, and they will not come back anymore. And the same is going on with the smaller mountain glaciers, especially in the Alps and in other places where you find smaller glaciers, so in Greenland or in the Antarctic or in the Arctic, that's different. But we expect in the Alps that within the next 30 years, almost all the glaciers will disappear.